Ethan sat in the silence of the living room, a silence that had become his world. It was a thick, cloying thing, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city and the whisper of expensive silk as his wife, Isabella, paced before the grand marble fireplace. The wheelchair felt cold and unyielding beneath him, a metal cage for a body he pretended was broken. Isabella thought he was a prisoner in his own skin, a shattered man whose future was a long, bleak corridor of dependency. She didn't know the truth. Within 1 hour, the life she had so carefully constructed upon a foundation of lies and condescension would be ground to dust. The architect of her ruin was the man she saw as nothing more than a broken piece of furniture. He watched her, his expression placid, his hands resting on the armrests. She was beautiful, a sculpture of disdain and impatience. Her phone was pressed to her ear, her voice a low, venomous hiss. She believed he was too medicated or too defeated to comprehend. "I can't do this anymore, Mother," she whispered her back to him. "He just sits there, staring. It's like living with a ghost, a horribly expensive ghost." A pause. "No, the papers are all here. My lawyer, Mr. Vance, is on his way. We'll have him sign over power of attorney. It's for his own good, of course. He can't manage his affairs. And then we can finally move on." Move on. The words were so clean, so sterile, for an act of such profound betrayal. Ethan felt a cold stillness settle in his chest, the calm that precedes a hurricane. He had built this house for her, designed every line and curve to reflect what he thought was her grace. He now saw that it was merely a beautiful cage for a hollow heart. Have you ever felt completely underestimated? Pushed into a corner where your only way out was to become something other than you are, just to see the truth? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, as we journey into this story of what happens when a quiet man is pushed too far. And if you enjoy stories where the patient and the principled finally get their due, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. The storm is about to break, and you won't want to miss it. The life Ethan and Isabella had shared, at least on the surface, was the envy of their social circle. He was the quiet, thoughtful architect, known for his minimalist yet soulful designs that seemed to harmonize with the natural world. She was the effervescent socialite, the daughter of Richard and Beatrice Vance, a family whose name was etched onto the brass plaques of old money institutions. They saw Ethan as a respectable, if somewhat unexciting, addition to their lineage, a man who earned a comfortable living but would never truly understand the stratosphere of wealth they inhabited. Ethan had allowed them this illusion. He found their obsession with status tiresome, a noisy distraction from the things that truly mattered: the integrity of a design, the honesty of materials, the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful and lasting. He had loved Isabella, or at least the woman he believed her to be. He saw flashes of warmth beneath the polished veneer, moments of vulnerability that made him think the society she was raised in was a performance, not her true self. He built their life around that hope. He supported her gallery openings, her charity galas, her endless need for social validation. He was her steady, reliable anchor. He thought that was enough. He thought their foundation was built on love. He discovered, quite by accident, that it was built on a miscalculation. The catalyst arrived in a plain manila envelope, misaddressed to his personal post office box instead of their shared one. It was from a private wealth management firm he didn't recognize. Inside was a portfolio summary and a letter addressed to Isabella. The letter was clinical, congratulatory. It detailed the steps for liquidating shared assets post-divorce and strategies for sheltering them from a spouse's claims, particularly a spouse of modest and easily calculable means. It was all there: the plan, the timeline, the contemptuous assessment of his worth. The document outlined her intention to claim he was mentally incompetent due to a decline in his creative faculties, using his quiet nature as evidence of his detachment from reality. The goal was to secure control of their assets, sell his small firm, and move on with a life unburdened by his lack of ambition. He sat in his car for over an hour, the papers spread on the passenger seat, the words blurred. It wasn't the financial betrayal that cut so deeply. It was the casual cruelty of it all, the clinical dismissal of their entire life together. She saw him not as a husband, but as a poorly performing stock to be sold off. His love, his support, his quiet dedication, they were liabilities on her balance sheet. In that moment, something within him shifted. The patient, forgiving man receded, and the architect took over. An architect sees a flawed structure not with anger, but with clarity. He assesses the faulty foundation, understands the stress points, and designs a new structure. Sometimes this requires a controlled demolition of the old one. His plan was audacious, born of a cold, clear grief. He had to know the absolute truth. He had to see the unvarnished reality of the woman he had married and the family he had joined. He couldn't get that by confronting her. She would lie. She would perform. She would twist reality until he was the villain. No, he had to remove himself as a threat. He had to become an object of pity, a burden. He had to become paralyzed. Only then, when she believed he was utterly powerless, would she show him her true face. He would give her the stage, the lighting, and the perfect audience. And he would watch from the silent, still center of the storm he was about to create. The accident was tragically believable. He'd been working on the plans for a small lakeside cabin, a personal project, and had been retrieving old blueprints from the high shelves in his home studio. A ladder, a supposed slip, a devastating fall. He'd made sure a neighbor heard the crash, a carefully timed collision with a metal shelving unit. The subsequent call to emergency services was filled with feigned, pain-slurred confusion. At the hospital, he was a master of subtle deception. He used his deep understanding of anatomy and physiology, a side effect of his obsession with ergonomic design, to mimic the symptoms of a severe spinal cord injury resulting in paraplegia. He let the doctors run their tests. He knew that while they could see evidence of trauma from the fall, the neurological disconnect he was faking was nearly impossible to disprove definitively. The diagnosis was delivered with grim sympathy. He would likely never walk again. Isabella's performance in the hospital was worthy of an award. She wept. She held his hand, her touch as cold as ice. She spoke to the doctors with a perfect imitation of a devastated, devoted wife. "Whatever it takes," she'd said, her voice choked with manufactured emotion. "We will get through this. I will be here for him." Ethan lay still, watching her through half-lidded eyes, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He saw the flicker of something else in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. Not grief, but a chilling, complex calculation. She was already assessing this new variable, factoring it into the equation of her life. Bringing him home was a logistical nightmare that laid the first true cracks in her facade. The hospital bed in the living room, the ramps, the visits from nurses. These were ugly, inconvenient intrusions into her perfectly curated world. Her patience, thin as gold leaf, began to fray almost immediately. The first true moment of humiliation came 3 days after his return. A home care nurse had just finished his morning routine, leaving him positioned in his wheelchair by the large bay window overlooking the manicured gardens. He was supposed to be resting, his eyes closed. Isabella came in, phone to her ear, assuming he was asleep or sedated. "I know, Mother, I know," she said, her voice a strained whisper that carried perfectly in the quiet room. "The house smells like antiseptic, and the clutter, ramps and medical supplies everywhere. It's like living in a hospice." She walked over to the window, her back to him, staring out at the rose bushes he had planted for her. "He just lies there. He barely speaks. The doctors say it's the shock, but it's more than that. It's like the light has gone out. The man I married is gone." Her voice dropped lower, laced with a bitterness that was far more genuine than her tears at the hospital. "Frankly, it's a nightmare. All our plans, the trip to Santorini, the gallery benefit, all of it, gone. Now I'm a full-time caregiver. Me." Ethan didn't move a muscle. He kept his breathing even, his face a mask of serene emptiness. But inside, a quiet rage was beginning to smolder. The man she married wasn't gone. He was right here. He was listening. He was learning. He was a silent observer cataloging every slight, every sigh of irritation, every selfish complaint. She wasn't mourning the loss of her husband. She was mourning the loss of her lifestyle. He was no longer an asset, not even a poorly performing one. He was a liability, a piece of broken machinery that was ruining the aesthetic of her beautiful life. On his lap, his hands rested near a small, half-finished object he grabbed from his workshop before the fall. It was a block of basswood he had been carving into a falcon, its wings outstretched. The wood was smooth, the lines of the wings precise and elegant. In the weeks to come, as he sat in his silent prison, he would work on it secretly at night, his hands moving with practiced skill in the darkness. The bird was a symbol of everything they couldn't see in him: the patience, the hidden strength, the ability to soar above the world that sought to cage him. Isabella glanced at the block of wood with disdain. "He just holds that stupid thing. A splintered piece of wood. It's pathetic." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the sound like tiny hammers driving nails into the coffin of their marriage. Ethan opened his eyes, staring at the intricate grain of the wood. The demolition had begun. The days bled into a monotonous rhythm of humiliation. Ethan's world shrank to the confines of the house, a gilded cage he had designed, and the wheelchair became an extension of his body, a constant physical reminder of his feigned helplessness. Isabella's caregiving was a performance for the nurses. When they were there, she was attentive, adjusting his pillows, offering him water with a saccharine smile. The moment they left, the mask dropped. She would place his food on a tray just out of his comfortable reach, forcing him to strain. She would forget to bring him a book or the remote for the television, leaving him to stare at the walls for hours. These were small, petty cruelties, designed to wear him down, to reinforce his powerlessness. He endured it all with a placid, almost unnerving calm. His silence became his shield and his weapon. It unnerved her. She wanted a reaction, tears, anger, anything to confirm his brokenness. Instead, she got quiet observation. He watched her every move, his architect's eye for detail now focused on deconstructing her character. He saw the way her smile never reached her eyes, the subtle tightening of her jaw when she had to touch him, the flicker of relief on her face when she left the room. Her family's visit was the next stage of the ordeal. Beatrice and Richard Vance arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume and palpable disapproval. Beatrice, Isabella's mother, was a woman who seemed to be perpetually looking down her nose at the world. Richard, her father, was a quieter man, his spine seemingly removed and replaced by his wife's indomitable will. He was the silent enabler, the man who nodded along to his wife's pronouncements, his own integrity a small price to pay for a peaceful life. They stood over his wheelchair, their expressions a mixture of pity and distaste. "Oh, you poor, poor man," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with insincere sympathy. She didn't address him directly, but rather spoke to Isabella, as if Ethan were a deaf-mute child. "Isabella, my dear, how are you coping? This is just an unimaginable burden." "I'm managing, Mother," Isabella said, placing a hand on Beatrice's arm, a gesture of shared martyrdom. Richard cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Ethan," he said, the first person to use his name, "terrible business, just terrible." But his eyes quickly darted away, unable to hold Ethan's calm, steady gaze. They moved to the far side of the room, near the fireplace, believing the distance granted them privacy. Their voices were low, but in the oppressive silence of the house, Ethan heard every word. "Let's be practical, Isabella," Beatrice began, her tone shifting from pity to brisk strategy. "What are the financials on this? His firm, it's a small boutique operation, isn't it? Will his disability insurance be enough to cover this long-term situation?" "His partner is managing the firm for now," Isabella explained. "But you're right, it's not a fortune. I, will have to be very careful going forward. My ambitions for the new gallery wing might have to be postponed." The manufactured sigh that followed was a masterpiece of self-pity. "Postponed, darling, they'll have to be abandoned," Beatrice scoffed. "You're tethered to him now. Unless," she let the word hang in the air. "Has your lawyer been in touch? About managing his affairs? A man in his condition can't be expected to handle complex decisions." "Mr. Vance is drawing up the paperwork," Isabella confirmed. "It's the only responsible thing to do." Richard, to his credit, shifted his weight. "Beatrice, perhaps this isn't the time." "Nonsense, Richard," she snapped. "This is precisely the time for practicality. Emotion doesn't pay for nurses. Isabella has to protect herself. He was never truly one of us anyway. He lacked the proper ambition. This tragedy has only made that more apparent." Ethan felt the words land like physical blows, yet his expression remained unchanged. He ran a thumb over the smooth, carved wing of the wooden falcon hidden in his lap. He was an architect. He understood that to build something new, you must first have a precise and unflinching understanding of the site. He was surveying the wreckage of his life, taking meticulous notes. They saw him as a ruin, a collapsed structure. They had no idea he was the one holding the blueprints for what was to come. They saw a man in a chair, a liability. They were blind to the patient predator, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal that the cage they saw was not a cage at all. It was a hunting blind. The introduction of Julian marked a significant escalation. He was a man cut from the same cloth as Isabella's family, old money, exuding an effortless arrogance that came from a life devoid of consequence. He was a property developer whose primary skill seemed to be leveraging his family name into lucrative deals. Isabella introduced him as an old friend, there to offer support and business advice during this difficult time. Ethan knew a lie when he saw one. The way they looked at each other, the way they stood just a little too close, the shared glances that were meant to be subtle, but screamed of intimacy. It was a poorly rehearsed play, and he was the captive audience. Julian treated Ethan with a kind of patronizing pity that was almost worse than Beatrice's open contempt. He would pat Ethan on the shoulder, his touch lingering in a gesture of dominance. "Tough break, old man," he'd say, his voice smooth and condescending. "But don't you worry, I'm here to help Isabella with the heavy lifting. We'll make sure everything is taken care of." The implication was clear. The real man of the house had arrived. They grew bolder with each visit. They started holding conversations in front of him that were barely veiled negotiations about his life. One afternoon, as Ethan sat by the window pretending to doze, Julian and Isabella stood by the grand piano, looking over a set of architectural drawings, Ethan's drawings. "The structure is sound," Julian said, tapping a finger on the plans for the house. "Good bones, as they say. But the aesthetic is a bit sterile. Too much minimalism. We could open up this whole wall, put in floor-to-ceiling glass. And this studio of his, it would make a fantastic entertainment suite. A bar, a billiards table." "I always thought it was such a waste of space," Isabella agreed, her voice eager. "Ethan was so sentimental about it, but you're right, it has much more potential." They were redesigning his life, his home, his sanctuary, right in front of him. They were erasing him from his own creation. Ethan's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. The urge to stand up, to unleash the torrent of fury building inside him, was immense, but he held back. It wasn't time. The demolition had to be precise. Every charge had to be placed perfectly for the structure to collapse exactly as planned. Anger was a blunt instrument. He needed a scalpel. The ultimate betrayal came a week later. Isabella had been on the phone in the kitchen, her voice a hushed murmur. Ethan, with the practiced silence he had cultivated, was able to wheel himself to the doorway without a sound. He caught the tail end of her conversation. "No, he's completely passive. The doctors said it's common. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him. Julian has already spoken to his contacts about selling the firm. They think we can get a decent price for the intellectual property and the client list. It will be a good starting pot for our new venture." A starting pot. His life's work, the firm he had built from the ground up with his partner Sarah, a company founded on principles of integrity and sustainable design. To them, it was just seed money. He backed the wheelchair away silently, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm of resolve. The grief he had felt was now completely gone, burned away by the cold, clear fire of purpose. He was no longer a husband seeking truth. He was a strategist laying a trap. That night, under the sliver of a moon, he worked on the wooden falcon. His carving tools, which he had his loyal partner Sarah secretly bring him, moved with deft precision. He hollowed out the bird's body, creating a small, secret compartment. Inside, he placed a tiny USB drive. On that drive was everything. Copies of the prenuptial agreement Isabella had laughed at when she signed it, detailed records of his true net worth, a complete history of his company's staggering success, and audio files from the tiny recording device he had concealed on his person since the day he came home from the hospital. The falcon was almost complete. Its eyes, made of tiny chips of obsidian, seemed to watch him with a fierce, knowing intelligence. It was ready to fly. The storm was coming. The quiet before it was almost over. The evening of the confrontation was orchestrated with the precision of a theater production. Isabella had called it a small family dinner, a chance to discuss the future in a calm, supportive environment. The cast was assembled, Beatrice and Richard, their faces etched with grim purpose, and Julian, looking smug and proprietary as he stood with his arm draped possessively over the back of Isabella's chair. And of course the guest of honor, Isabella's lawyer, a portly, self-satisfied man named Arthur Vance, who was no relation but shared the family's predatory instincts. He arrived carrying a slim leather briefcase that seemed to radiate a funereal aura. They sat Ethan at the head of the long, polished mahogany dining table. He was the silent, broken king at his own deposition. They ate a lavish meal he couldn't properly enjoy, the conversation flowing around him as if he were a statue. They talked of the stock market, of summer plans in the Hamptons, of Julian's latest property acquisition. It was a performance of normalcy, a deliberate act of exclusion designed to make him feel his irrelevance. Finally, after the plates were cleared, Isabella clapped her hands together lightly, a theatrical gesture to call the meeting to order. "Well," she began, her voice resonating with false sincerity, "I know this is difficult, but we need to be practical. Ethan, darling," she said, turning to him with a pitying smile, "we all love you so much. And because we love you, we want to make sure you're taken care of, that your affairs are managed properly." Mr. Vance opened his briefcase with a soft click. He slid a thick stack of documents across the table until it stopped just in front of Ethan. "This is a standard power of attorney agreement, Ethan," he explained, his tone condescendingly simple, as if speaking to a child. "It grants Isabella the authority to make financial and legal decisions on your behalf. Given your condition, it's the most sensible path forward. It protects you." "It protects us all," Beatrice added, her voice sharp. "It ensures stability." Isabella placed a pen on top of the documents. "It's just a signature, my love," she cooed. "Then we can put all this unpleasantness behind us. I will take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a thing ever again." Ethan looked down at the papers. He saw the dense blocks of legal text, the neat lines waiting for his signature. This was it, the final move in their game. They thought they had him in checkmate. He looked up, his gaze moving slowly from one face to the next. He lingered on Isabella, her expression a perfect blend of concern and steely resolve. He saw Julian, smirking, already counting his winnings. He saw Beatrice, impatient and triumphant. And he saw Richard, his father-in-law, staring at his own hands, unable to meet Ethan's eyes, the only one in the room with a flicker of a conscience, however weak. He let the silence stretch. He let them grow uncomfortable, their confident smiles tightening at the edges. He reached out, his hands steady, and pulled the documents closer. He picked up the pen. Isabella released a small, relieved sigh. Julian's smirk widened, but Ethan didn't sign. Instead, he used the pen to tap a slow, deliberate rhythm on the cover page. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was unnervingly loud in the tense silence. Then he set the pen down, perfectly parallel to the stack of papers. He folded his hands on the table in front of him, and for the first time in weeks, he spoke. His voice was not the weak, slurred whisper they expected. It was clear, calm, and resonant, filling the room with an authority they had forgotten he possessed. "No," he said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Isabella's smile vanished. What did you say?" "I said no," Ethan repeated, his eyes locking onto hers. "I will not be signing these papers, or any other papers you put in front of me." He paused, letting the shock register on their faces. "I think," he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, "that we should have a different kind of conversation, a more honest one." He looked at Beatrice. "You called me a burden, an unimaginable burden. You worried about my firm being a small boutique operation that couldn't possibly cover my expenses." He turned his gaze to Julian. "You stood in my studio with my wife and planned to turn my creative sanctuary into an entertainment suite with a billiards table. You called my life's work a starting pot for your new venture." Finally, his eyes returned to Isabella. "And you," he said, his voice dropping, each word carefully chosen, a quiet bomb of accusation. "You stood in this very room and told your mother you were living in a hospice. You complained about the smell of antiseptic. You mourned the loss of your trip to Santorini, not the loss of your husband. You planned to declare me incompetent, liquidate my assets, and discard me like a broken toy." A deathly pallor spread across Isabella's face. Julian and Beatrice exchanged panicked glances. Richard seemed to shrink in his chair. How could you know that?" Isabella stammered. "You were sedated." "I was not sedated," Ethan said, his voice like ice. "I was listening. I was watching. I was learning." And then he did the impossible. He placed his hands firmly on the arms of the wheelchair. He pushed, slowly, deliberately, with a strength they could not comprehend. He straightened his legs. He rose from the chair. He stood, tall and straight, at the head of the table, looking down at their stunned, horrified faces. The wheelchair, the symbol of his weakness and their power, now sat empty, a monument to their profound and catastrophic misjudgment. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Isabella's sharp, ragged gasp for air. The tableau held for a long, frozen moment. 4 faces, a gallery of disbelief, horror, and dawning comprehension. Isabella's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Beatrice's hand flew to her pearls, her carefully constructed composure shattering like cheap glass. Julian had physically recoiled in his chair as if Ethan had struck him. Only Richard seemed unsurprised, his expression one of weary, inevitable resignation. as if he had known all along that a reckoning was due. "But your legs," Isabella finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The diagnosis, you can't." "The human body is a remarkable thing," Ethan said calmly, his voice cutting through her confusion. "But the human will is even more remarkable. It can make a body do things that seem impossible. It can make a man lie perfectly still while his world is being torn apart. It can make him endure humiliation to see the unvarnished truth. And it can make him stand up when the time is right." He took a step away from the chair, the movement fluid and certain. He walked around the corner of the table, his presence dominating the room. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. He was no longer the patient, they were. He was no longer the prisoner, they were trapped in the web of their own deceit. Just as Julian began to sputter, searching for some way to regain control, the doorbell chimed. The sound, crisp and clear, sliced through the tension. Everyone startled, except for Ethan. "That will be my guest," he said with the same unnerving calm. "Please, let her in." A moment later, the housekeeper showed a woman into the dining room. She was in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of professional, no-nonsense competence. She carried a heavy leather briefcase that made Mr. Vance's look like a child's toy. "Everyone," Ethan said, his voice now ringing with command. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Connolly. She is not just the managing partner of my small boutique operation. She is my partner in a firm that has quietly become one of the most successful architectural design and urban planning consultancies in the country. She is also my personal attorney." Sarah nodded curtly to the assembled group, her eyes sweeping over them with a cool, appraising glance. She set her briefcase on the table and opened it. She didn't look at the stunned family. She addressed Ethan directly. "Are we ready to proceed?" "We are," Ethan confirmed. He turned back to his wife. "Isabella, you and your family have been operating under a series of grave misconceptions. The first and most obvious is about my health. The second is about my character. But the biggest, the one that is about to change everything for you, is about my finances." He looked at Sarah. "The presentation, if you would." Sarah removed a slim tablet and a small projector from her briefcase. With a few taps, an image flashed onto the large white wall of the dining room. It was the logo for a company they didn't recognize, Nexus Design Group. Nexus Design Group, Ethan explained, is the parent company of the small firm you all know. I founded it 12 years ago. I am the majority shareholder, holding 65% of the stock. We have offices in New York, London, and Tokyo. We have designed eco-conscious urban renewal projects, cutting-edge corporate campuses, and private residences for people whose names you would certainly recognize. My lack of ambition, as your mother so delicately put it, was a deliberate choice. I kept my life simple because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not for the number in my bank account. I wanted a partner, not a beneficiary." He let that sink in. The shock on their faces was profound. He saw Isabella's mind racing, recalculating everything, the gears of her greed grinding against the horrifying new reality. "I see you're beginning to understand," Ethan said softly. "The life you thought was your own, the status you prided yourselves on, much of it was propped up by me. The angel investment that saved your father's company from bankruptcy 3 years ago, that was my money, funneled anonymously through a shell corporation. The seed funding for your art gallery, Isabella, a gift from me, which you believe came from a family trust. I built a beautiful stage for you, hoping you would become the person you pretended to be. Instead, you decided to burn the theater down with me inside." He picked up the small, carved falcon from where he'd left it by his plate. He twisted the base, and the tiny USB drive popped out. He handed it to Sarah. "And finally," he said, his eyes locking on Isabella's, "we have the evidence." The consequences unfolded with the brutal efficiency of a natural disaster. Sarah Connolly was not a theatrical lawyer. She was a creature of pure, unadulterated legal fact. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The documents and data she presented did all the shouting for her. First, she displayed the prenuptial agreement on the projector. The key clauses were highlighted in stark yellow. It was an ironclad document Ethan had insisted upon, not to protect his modest apparent wealth, but to protect the vast fortune he had kept hidden. It contained a strict infidelity clause, and more importantly, a bad faith provision, which voided any and all claims if one party was found to have acted maliciously or deceptively to undermine the other's financial or personal well-being. As you can see, Sarah stated, her voice flat and final, the agreement is quite clear. In the event of a divorce precipitated by infidelity or malicious action, the offending party forfeits all claims to any assets, shared or individual, acquired during the marriage. Isabella stared at the wall, aghast. But my lawyer said it was just a formality. He said it was unenforceable. Mr. Vance, her lawyer, began to sweat profusely, dabbing at his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Well, in most cases, under normal circumstances, these are not normal circumstances, Sarah cut in, her tones sharp enough to draw blood. She plugged the USB drive into her tablet. And we have ample evidence of malicious action. A new window opened on the projected screen. It was an audio waveform. Sarah tapped play. Isabella's voice filled the room, cold and clear. I can't do this anymore, Mother. He just sits there, a horribly expensive ghost. The recording continued, a greatest hits of her cruelty. The conversation with her mother about his finances, her complaints about being a caregiver, and the damning final conversation she'd had in the kitchen about selling his firm and using the money as a starting pot with Julian. With each new revelation, the color drained further from Isabella's face. Julian looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to edge his chair away from Isabella's, a rat preparing to desert a sinking ship. Furthermore, Sarah continued, pulling up a new set of documents, we have filed a countersuit for fraud. She looked directly at Isabella. It seems you used funds from a joint account, funds Mr. Thorne believed were for your gallery, to make a series of highly speculative and ultimately failed investments with Mr. Julian Croft here. You attempted to cover your losses by misrepresenting them as gallery expenses. We have the full transaction history. Julian shot to his feet. This is slander. I had nothing to do with... I would advise you to remain silent, Mr. Croft, Sarah said without looking at him, unless you'd like to be named as a co-defendant. We have your emails. We have your texts. You were a knowing participant in the scheme. Julian sat back down, his face pale. His escape route was gone. The final blow was reserved for the Vances. Mr. Vance, Sarah said, turning her attention to Richard, Nexus Design Group will be calling in its loan to your company, the full principal plus interest, immediately. As per the terms of the agreement, failure to pay will result in a transfer of a controlling interest in the company to us. Beatrice gasped. You can't. That company is our legacy. It's a legacy you were about to lose 3 years ago, Ethan said quietly, speaking for the first time in several minutes. I saved it. I propped it up, and you repaid me with contempt. The legacy is now forfeit. Richard finally looked up, his face a mask of utter defeat. He looked at his wife, at his daughter, and then at Ethan. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, hollowed-out shame. He had stood by, silent and weak, as his family's arrogance wrote a check their character couldn't cash. Now, the bill had come due. The room was silent again, but this time it was the silence of a tomb. The Vances and their associates were not just defeated, they were annihilated, their futures dismantled piece by piece by the quiet man they had so carelessly written off. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings in quiet, painful dissolution. Isabella, stripped of her arrogance, attempted a different strategy, desperate contrition. She called him, she texted him, she even showed up at the gate of the house he now occupied alone. Her apologies were hollow, transparent bids for mercy. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was devastated that it hadn't worked. "Ethan, please," she pleaded through the intercom one rainy afternoon, her voice distorted by static and desperation. "I made a terrible mistake. I was scared. I wasn't thinking clearly. The woman who said those things, that wasn't me. You know me." "I thought I did," Ethan replied, his voice calm, speaking into the receiver in his quiet, empty studio. "But the person I knew was an illusion. The real you is the one who left me thirsty, who discussed selling my life's work with your lover while I sat 10 feet away. That's the truth I needed to see, and now I have." He cut the connection, the silence rushing back in. There was no satisfaction in her pain. There was only a deep, profound sadness for the love he had thought was real, and the years he had wasted trying to earn the respect of people who were incapable of giving it. He offered her a settlement through Sarah, a small, one-time payment, enough to start a new life, but not enough to sustain the one she had lost. It was more than she deserved, but it was an act of grace he needed to perform for himself, a final closing of the chapter. She took it without a word of thanks. Julian Croft disappeared from their social circle, his reputation in tatters. The fraud lawsuit ensured that his name was now synonymous with duplicity. His business partners deserted him, and the easy access to capital he had always enjoyed dried up overnight. He was ruined, not by a loss of money, but by a loss of the one thing that truly mattered in his world, the illusion of respectable power. The most surprising development came from Richard Vance. He requested a meeting with Ethan, not with lawyers present, but man to man. They met in a small, neutral cafe downtown. Richard looked older, diminished, the weight of his family's downfall etched onto his face. "I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," he began, his voice low and raspy. He didn't look at Ethan. He stared into his coffee cup as if it held the answers to his own moral failings. "I stood by. I let it happen. I let Beatrice's ambition and Isabella's entitlement poison everything. I was a coward." He finally looked up, and for the first time, Ethan saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "I knew what you were doing for us. I knew the investment that saved my company came from you." Beatrice refused to believe it. She couldn't accept that the quiet man she looked down on was our benefactor. It didn't fit her worldview. And I didn't have the courage to stand up to her. For that, I am truly sorry. Ethan listened, saying nothing. He didn't offer absolution. He couldn't. But he could offer a measure of understanding. "We all make choices, Richard," he said quietly. "You made yours. Now you have to live with them. So do I." He stood up, leaving his own coffee untouched, and walked out of the cafe, leaving Richard alone with his regrets. It was not a reconciliation, but it was a form of closure, a quiet acknowledgement of a shared human frailty. Ethan was rebuilding his life, not on a foundation of anger or revenge, but on the solid bedrock of truth, however painful it had been to excavate. 6 months later, the city skyline glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan's new home. It wasn't a mansion like the one he had shared with Isabella. It was a penthouse apartment, a space he had designed for himself. It was minimalist, yes, but it was filled with warmth, with natural wood and stone, with books and art that he loved. It was a space that was honest, a reflection of the man he truly was. He was in his studio, a smaller but more inspiring version of his old one, sketching at a large drafting table. The plans in front of him were for a new project, a community library and arts center for an underserved neighborhood. It was a project with no profit margin, funded entirely by an anonymous donation from his own foundation. It was work that had meaning, that fed his soul. The small, carved falcon sat on the corner of his desk, its obsidian eyes seeming to watch him with approval. It was a reminder of his ordeal, but also a symbol of his resilience, of his ability to see the world from a higher perspective. His life was quieter now, but richer. His circle of friends was smaller, but more genuine. He had reconnected with people who valued his intellect and his kindness, not his bank account. The ordeal had been a crucible, burning away everything that was false and leaving only what was real and true. He had learned that true strength wasn't about power or dominance, but about enduring with integrity. He had learned that true worth couldn't be measured by stock portfolios or social standing, but by the quality of one's character. The doorbell chimed, a soft, pleasant sound. He smiled, setting down his pencil. Sarah had told him about a landscape architect who was consulting on the library project, a woman named Clara, whose passion for creating green spaces in urban deserts mirrored his own passion for creating soulful buildings. He had spoken to her on the phone, and for the first time in a long time, he had felt a spark of easy, unpretentious connection. He walked to the door and opened it. Clara stood there, a warm smile on her face, a portfolio tucked under her arm. Her eyes were bright and direct, and when she looked at him, he felt seen, not as a symbol, not as a provider, not as a project, but simply as a man. "Ethan?" she asked, her smile widening. "I'm Clara. It's so good to finally meet you in person." "Clara," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Welcome, I'm glad you're here." As he closed the door, he took one last look back at the life he had left behind. He felt no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet sense of peace. He had faced the worst of human nature and had emerged not broken, but whole. He had faked being paralyzed to test his wife, and her reaction had indeed changed everything. It had destroyed a life built on lies, but in its place it had cleared the ground for him to build a new one, founded on truth, integrity, and the quiet promise of a hopeful future. In the end, this story isn't just about revenge. It's about the profound difference between value and worth. So many people, like Isabella and her family, spend their lives chasing external validation, wealth, status, appearances. They build their identities on a foundation of sand, and when the tide of truth comes in, it all washes away. True worth is internal. It's the integrity you maintain when no one is watching, the kindness you show when you have nothing to gain, and the strength to stand up for who you are, even if you have to sit down for a while to do it. What do you think is the most important quality in a person? Is it loyalty, honesty, or something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of vindication and renewal resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of karma, justice, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.